my big thing about horror is if you're running a horror game, about 10 to at most 70% of the game should be horror. Flat out.
Okay.
All the rest of it should be humorous. It should be like investigative. And horror should creep in at unexpected moments and provide terror and then subside quickly. Because that gives people a chance to like deflate and they go, all right, I know what's going on. And it comes back and it gets them again.
I need you to get ready for the history we were not taught in school, combined with horror. Chris and I discuss how he found tabletop gaming and what he loved about it and what about it was a struggle. Chris explains how Harlem Unbound was him continuing his drive to fix things he thinks need fixing. I loved Chris's openness and willingness to discuss subjects and experiences beyond my own and put it all in the context of our hobby and this industry. This is a great interview, and we cover much of what fuels his creativity. I hope that I can talk him into coming back again. All right, sit back, relax, maybe grab something to drink, and enjoy my time with Chris.
I'm Allison Arth, and when I'm not busy disagreeing with Craig Shipman about his feelings on Billy Joel's songwriting capabilities, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today I'm chatting with Chris Spivey of Darker Hue Studios. Chris is a writer, game developer, United States Army veteran, and CEO of Darker Hue Studios. He writes and develops role-playing games. He brings to his work a love of gaming, horror, and a history, along with a mission to create more inclusive gaming worlds. His most recent self-published work is Haunted West, a Weird West tabletop role-playing game amplifying the voices of the often overlooked people in history. His groundbreaking and critically acclaimed game Harlem Unbound won 3 gold Ennies and the IGDN Groundbreaker Award. He has also contributed to Call of Cthulhu Starter Set, Cthulhu Confidential, Harlem Unbound 2nd Edition, 7th Sea Land of Fire and Gold, Geist 2nd Edition, Trail of Cthulhu Out of the Woods, and 1,000 Years of Night. Ooh,
I'm going to interrupt you because I am that kind of guy that you forgot 2 that I'm incredibly proud of because there's still more. Dune, which I was one of the people that got another gold Emmy for best writing.
Oh,
I'm going to do some humble brags right now.
Please.
And for Harlem Unbound, when I won all those Ennies and all those awards and got my Diana Jones Award nod, I took all that clout and I went over to Cubicle 7 and said, hey, I am a massive Doctor Who fan and you have never talked to me. And they went, really? And then I got to write the new Doctor Who core rulebook.
Oh my God, Chris. Well, so you need to update your website because that's where I got this intro from.
You have been to my website more often than I have.
So, boy, oh boy, I did not realize that you had a chance to work both on Dune and Doctor Who. Well, first of all, let me welcome you. So, Chris, welcome to the 3rd floor.
Thank you. I told Craig before we started that I promised to, much how I do on a Genres podcast, I will speak over him. I will stop talking mid-sentence just to see if he picks up on it. And then Eddie can listen to this and think that, man, I am glad I did not go on there. It's someone else deals with the horror that is Chris on a recorded line.
Oh, that's amazing. So, Chris, I'm going to have to ask you the question I'm sure you've gotten on every podcast, which is essentially your origin story as a gamer. But what I'd like to do is frame it a little bit differently. So at one point, you knew nothing about role-playing games. You knew nothing about grabbing a sheet of paper, a set of dice, and pretending to be somebody else. And then it was put in front of you for the first time. Can we go back there?
I think it would be cramped because I was still in the womb when that happened.
What?
Having grown up in Alabama, I started role-playing around 5 or 6.
Really?
So it was like the red box set. Me and my buddy had it. And we played some, and that's when I first started seeing there weren't people like me in the game. Even then, I was like looking at the elf and the dwarf.
And obviously that had an impact on you. I mean, even at 5, you recognized the fact that there just wasn't that representation?
Yeah, because growing up, well, I'm going to say it again, growing up in Alabama, there's a lot of pressure. And so there's some things that almost by the age of 3 or 4.
Really?
And the rampant racism is obvious just from how people interact with you as a child, even compared to how they interact to different children.
Yeah.
And so you may not know it consciously, but you know it subconsciously.
Gotcha. Now, Was this something that was spoken about in the family, or was it just kind of dealt with? Does that make sense?
So I don't know if I've mentioned this one before. Maybe it's on a Kickstarter page somewhere. But I was raised by my grandmother, who was very much old school, and she would just not talk about problems at all. Like, not her thing. So you would suffer through. And so I was forced to find out a lot of things by myself, which led to my love of reading and then like analyzing things and trying to get to the bottom of different things. So in one sense, I have to thank her for her avoidance tendencies.
Because it drove you to the books and to your research. Do you have a sense then when you really...
My trolls, though, would hate her with a fiery passion.
And this is interesting for me because it's very different than my experience for obvious reasons as we look at each other on camera, as well as I was not born in Alabama. I was born in upstate New York. So I'm really relying on you to help me understand this. And it's possible I won't understand it, but I'm going to ask the questions anyway. Do you have a sense? I mean, you mentioned you had an awareness, conscious or subconscious, young, right? But then you found yourself reading, learning more. Is there an age where you felt like you really got an understanding of what the world was in relation to that? Or was it just so gradual and it just sunk in over time?
If I ever get there, I will tell you, because it is a constantly changing thing.
Yeah.
It's something I even talk about in my work, how racism has evolved over the decades and centuries. It was obviously, because you can tell at one point in time that they could, well, we're going to get back there soon, is how the world's turning, but you could actively strike a marginalized person on the street as a white person and nothing would happen to you. Some people use that as their, how they would get elected into office as mayor and governor. And that subsided. So then it became more of microaggressions and like constant job things. They would find things, they'd complain about your hair not being proper for like their standard. And then that's how it was. But now we're trending back to the violence and politicians getting back into office off racism. So it's constantly evolving and shifting. So there's no time to ever get used to it. You have to keep up with it to try to keep talking about it so other people can learn about it and educate them to hopefully help change it.
So let's go back to you playing Redbox. You identify when you looked at Redbox that there really is nobody that, like, as you put it, looked like you. Did that prevent you from enjoying the game? Did that prevent you from playing the game? Or did you still end up enjoying the hobby? Or is that something, a love for the hobby came later?
It put me off fantasy. And even to today, I am not a big fantasy fan. If you even look at the work that I've done, or if you followed me when I tweet about books or everything else, I very rarely talk about fantasy. I did make a few exceptions, and I've got some Pathfinder work too under my belt.
And that was as the genre total, right? So not only just within role-playing games, from the books you read, the movies you watched, just overall fantasy just was not your gig.
There are some exceptions. For instance, the Amaro series, which didn't get very far. If you haven't read Amaro, it was basically a black writer that made their own. It was close enough that the Conan people decided it was a riff on Conan and sued them.
Oh,
and
wow.
Sort of there was a battle there, so it didn't get the popularity it should have. Things like that. I of course watched the D&D movies, and I'll go out on a limb and say I saw the new D&D movie. I liked it. I took my daughter to see it because it was even age appropriate for her, and she liked it. And it is a pity that it got trolled so much that it will not have a sequel. There was so much potential there, and it's now wasted. Yeah.
My wife and I watched it and enjoyed it. I can't say that I loved it or thought it was as great as many people thought, but I enjoyed the movie. I mean, it was a fun movie. A lot of times we can bring a lot of baggage, our own baggage into there. So talking genres then, Chris, if you're put off by fantasy, was there particular genres that you found more inviting and more enjoyable as a consumer and then eventually as a creator?
I think horror would probably be the easy go-to, as that's kind of what I'm known for. But horror, science fiction, superheroes, and noir were sort of my staples.
When did you really first start consuming horror? When did horror become one of Chris's things? How old were you? Do you remember?
13-ish. I was at an estate sale. So an estate sale, in case someone doesn't know, is when someone passed away. They'll occasionally have other people come in, sort of like box up things and sort of move them around. And they'd hired a group of 6 of us kids, we're all 13 and 14, to sleep there that night to make sure like no one broke in. And that's when I first discovered the well-known, overly popularized, if you put his name on anything, it'll sell books, racist H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, so that was in the estate sale, and that's when you got your hands on it for the first time? No kidding.
They said if there's any books or anything we want, we could take them. And there was this big, thick, hefty tome that was the complete works of HP. And I was in a sleeping bag with my flashlight, and I was reading from that. The first time I ever read it. Yes. And I had no idea about the baggage associated with it. Something felt a little weird in some of the wordage, but it was engaging enough. And like reading The Outsider, to this day, The Outsider is still one of my favorite pieces of work by Lovecraft because of where I read it, the moments, my friends being there, and the entire moment is just etched in my brain for all time.
Really? As an adult now, looking backwards then, Chris, can you get a sense of what 13-year-old Chris loved so much? Like what got its hooks into you other than obviously a phenomenal setting to read H.P. Lovecraft in? But I mean, that was the beginning of a lifelong love of the genre. Do you have a sense of why?
Growing up as I'll give myself another humble brag, an overly intelligent black kid in Alabama, which everyone and all the pressure against you is saying that's who you shouldn't be, constantly being ostracized, and the pressure that the hopelessness that you're fighting against somehow resonated with cosmic horror. I don't know why. Maybe there's all something there.
Yeah, and I've heard that analogy talked about before, and that the subtext there can be picked up by marginalized people, and then they can connect that with it as well. So you are playing games. Before you've created anything, if we were to look at your kind of gaming history, is there games that were big moments for you? So games that really captured you and that you spent a lot of time growing up playing?
So you heard me say that I don't like fantasy.
Right.
But the people that got me solidly into role playing instead of when I sort of did it by myself with my buddy, but like the group were playing AD&D. And that AD&D game lasted 2 years. So it got me like a feel for campaigns, after which I'm going to tell you all the fantasy books that I liked. I discovered Michael Moorcock and Stormbringer. But when you read Elric doesn't read like fantasy. I was talking to the people on my Discord the other day. Elric reads more like science fiction from how you engage with it. So that's one of the reasons that really stuck with me. And so I ran with that.
Why is that? What's that distinction? Can you help me understand that?
It's just from how some of the descriptions are, how things are more alien than they are like supernatural. Like a dragon may not be called like a dragon, but it'd be like broken down by its species and all these other things to make it feel more Star Trekian, if you would.
Gotcha.
And solidly superheroes. Marvel, the Marvel TSR box set, 5 10-year campaigns constantly. I would run them. My friends would run them. It was a thing.
It was a hell of a game. I had so much fun playing that game. And honestly, for every hour I think that I played the game, I spent 4 hours making characters. That was one of my all-time favorite things to do, was to roll up characters in Marvel. So I'm going to make you look backwards again, then, Chris, as somebody who's now creating games, looking back at Marvel, what was it in that TSR Marvel game that really kept your interest for so long?
Other than I'm a Marvel, not a DC, was like instant 50% of it. But the love of campaigns and playing in a superhero campaign, which means you got experience. And if anyone remembers a TSR, you had great power, but crappy experience to increase that great power. So you'd have to play for a decade to raise that incredible to like 47, which ticked you into the amazing box. That I wanted to like improve my character. I wanted to have like my next mutation to like gain my Phoenix-like powers.
That's very cool. Now, were you playing, running, or both?
Both. So I was running one game. I had a buddy running another game, and the two of us were playing in someone else's game.
Do you have a preference? Do you prefer to run or play now?
Now, since I work full time, I design games on the side. I have a family. I have a 9-year-old that requires most of my time. I am purely running games because I don't have time to go and play in a game. So I make them people come to me to my house, so I don't have to drive to them. Because all right, that's how it used to be. I'd run one game a month, and everyone would come, and we would potentially grill out. So we'd have like this 4 to 8 hour session.
Wow,
4 hours of gameplay, like an hour of BSing, then like a couple hours of hanging out, drinking, and grilling. COVID kiboshed all that. And I've tried to game online, and gaming online doesn't work for me. It loses something. I like that people there are all interacting together at a table. So I stopped even playing and GMing for about 2 years.
Wow.
And I tried a few random Roll20 games throughout. Surprisingly enough, 2 of them were Marvel superheroes. A couple of them were Haunted West, so I could play test some stuff. And another one was Stormbringer. But it didn't feel right, so I stopped. And when COVID got, this is finger quotes, better, I started having people come over and we'd sit outside and play. And now we're at this weird point where a lot of people are saying it's gone. It is still very much here, like completely. My daughter went to a sleepaway camp for the first time in 2 week sleepaway camp for the first time ever. It was a long discussion between my wife and I about whether or not we would send her. We sent her, and the camp is small, so which is why we sent her. But someone got COVID, and it knocked out a third of the camp.
God.
All that to say that I now still game once a month. We have people come over, and if we can, so when I game, I can game. I used to game from 6 to 14 people.
Wow! Holy cow! Okay.
And now I've cut that down to I game for 5. It'll come over in my house because that feels doable, and you can keep your distance, but we can all still sort of game and be together.
Now,
do you want to hear about my college game of Vampire of the Dark Ages, where I stood on the second floor and I gamed down to like 20 people?
How can I say no to that, Chris?
Think about that. A Vampire Dark Ages game with 20 players who are all vampires cruising up into your town of what, 50 people?
Not LARPing, but actually playing the Masquerade.
Vampire of the Dark Ages, yes. The Masquerade game. I could go get on my shelf, but this is audio, I think, so no one else would see it. So,
all right. So let's talk logistics then. How do you keep 20 people interested when you're running a session?
You spin plates. So equivalently, you start off all together, and then you create little mini subplots, and you can have the groups themselves start interacting with each other while you're still telling the overarching plot, but they're still fully engaged with different encounters and trying to accomplish things. So that they break into smaller groups, anywhere from like 3 to 6 people. They'd come back together, and then things would happen together. Then they'd still go into smaller groups, and they would keep going. So in college, the smallest game I ever ran in college was 5 people. The largest was 20. It was averaged around 9 players, regardless of whatever the game was.
So this is so different, Chris, right? I mean, we hear talk about what's your ideal gaming group. I've never heard anybody say 20 before, right?
Well, it's not ideal, but I want people running a game. It should be, in my opinion, educational, fun, and engaging.
Right.
So I don't care how many people there are. I can make that happen for a group. I think someone said their best game they ever played was me at a con. This is Josh Heath put on a convention in Atlantic City. Oh, poor Josh. Like, I think Josh is amazing, but he got like this hotel when we got there was not what he thought. Half the hotel was like cordoned off from mold.
Ugh,
and the staff was almost as an active revolt against the management.
Oh boy.
And he still held the con because he was awesome. And we all stepped up into their bit, but he had people that didn't show up. So I needed to run some random games for him. So I said, sure. And I ran Harlem Unbound. I said, I got no adventure. I got no book, but I got my Harlem Unbound map. That's all I need. And I ran a game, I say, for 6 people off the cuff. And I had people tell me that's the best game they've ever played their entire life.
Did they say why?
Because they felt like they could do anything.
And how did you foster that? So when someone tells you that, you go, well, of course, because I did X, Y, and Z. How do you create that feeling that had such an impact?
It's really, well, I'm not going to say it's easy. It's easy for me to do because I'm very much an off-the-cuff improvisational GM, which you may have noticed from our short banter together, how you can't seem to stick to one thing before I move somewhere else. But they have the characters, and then you pick up bits of the character's history and you quickly interweave those in the stories, and you keep things moving for them. And my big thing about horror is if you're running a horror game, about 10 to at most 70% of the game should be horror. Flat out.
Okay.
All the rest of it should be humorous. It should be like investigative. And horror should creep in at unexpected moments and provide terror and then subside quickly. Because that gives people a chance to like deflate and they go, all right, I know what's going on. And it comes back and it gets them again. Because if it's sustained, it loses something and then people just become numb to it.
Yeah. I can definitely see that. So you're playing, running Vampire for 20 people in college. And as a GM, obviously GMs create at the table all the time. But at some point you decided or thought, I want to create for more than just my table. When did that happen? When did that desire or that opportunity to do more than just create at the table, to create for tables that you would never sit at? When did that?
Technically, I'd stay in high school. I started making a game. I've mentioned it only in passing once or twice to people, but I because I wanted to fix it, made my own fantasy Africa sort of game.
Interesting.
I was maybe, what was that? High school senior. And I made it for my friends and they played it. They had fun and it went into the shelf and it never came back. Then I stopped and it was always sort of nudging at me. And I think I eventually broke down around 2011 and started sketching up the outline that would become Harlem Unbound.
Oh, so Harlem Unbound for you is really kind of the first foray into that?
Well, I was solidly entrenched in Cthulhu. And regardless of how I feel about Cthulhu has always had a problem with marginalized people. Hands down. And it's something that I've been fixing at my own table for years. And I wanted to put out something that would help other people engage with it and try to attack it head on.
Very cool. So guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and methods for crafting their creations. We've already hinted at where we're headed. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Harlem Unbound.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Writer's Room, where you can find all sorts of adventures, antics, and escapades for the 7th Sea TTRPG. I'm Zoe Jackson.
I'm Evan Ackley.
And I am Patrick Keefe.
And we're here to tell you the stories of 7th Sea. If you enjoy actual play podcasts featuring adventure, drama, and swashbuckling heroism using music and dynamic sound effects, then you've come to the right place. Not only do we bring you stories from our 7th Sea gameplay, we also discuss the mechanics of the game in special episodes called Notes with the Narrator. To learn more, our Linktree link will be in the bio, and that will help you find us on your favorite podcatcher, as well as support us through our many different platforms. Won't you join us?
So typically what I do, Chris, is, and you've seen me do it a couple times in the first segment, go back in time. And we already kind of started doing that with Harlem Unbound, but I want to really talk about that some more. So it's 2011 and you said you start work on Harlem Unbound, but before you started work on Harlem Unbound, there was something floating around that urged you to start work on it. And I'd like to get a sense of what was it that made you say, I need to create this.
I guess anyone that has ever really got to know me knows I have a tendency that I want to fix things. It is inherent in my nature. I try not to do it. It is not necessarily a good thing, but I feel motivated enough to do it. It's one of the reasons why I go out and I protest, I march, I donate money. I do all these things because I want to make things better. It's why I joined the Army. I want to make things better. That's why I was a Boy Scout for a while. I know. It's scary. Boy Scouts. Don't do it.
So is this you saying, I want to fix Call of Cthulhu?
This is me saying I want to make gaming better because I thought I may one day have kids. And even if I didn't have kids, I want to make it better for other kids that are going to have to go through similar struggles than I went through. Because gaming has not been easy for me. Like, it is a long road to here.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
First, I will take a big sip of my beer. And before we do that, anyone that knows me knows I am likely drinking on the podcast. So I will tell you what I'm drinking this evening, so you can go out and buy one and maybe email them and tell them they should send me a free 4-pack. But it's the Gonzo Imperial Porter by Willett. It's barrel aged, 11.3%.
Very nice.
My first beer of the day after a 10-hour work day before I came to hang out with Craig. So, good stuff. Go get one. Email them. Have them send me one. I'm sorry. What was your question?
You said the gaming to get you to this point had been very, very difficult. We hinted at it with a representation piece at the very beginning, but I would love to better understand that struggle strictly from a gaming perspective.
So when you have to go out, in most cases, when you're new to gaming, you have to go out and find other gaming groups to game with. So you've got layer one, trying to find a group of people. As a marginalized person, you're going into a new environment with people that you don't know, who are primarily white because they are easier to find. They put out more information that they have open groups. And this is before this age of social media picked up. Because I am an old man, people. Like, for me, my college group, you want to know how I found them? I typed on the computer and I printed out a piece of paper that said, "Hey, I'm looking to game." And I put it up on a board. And I
was
put
it a
little
bulletin
cutouts.
board?
It was. I put out little cutouts with my number on it so they could call me, because I didn't go to the computer lab that often to check my email, only at the computer lab.
Well, I have a sneaking suspicion we are similar age, Chris, because my first email address was a .edu. College was the first time when the internet was invented. I was in college, and boy, do I remember those pieces of paper that you would find on the lamppost that had the cutout little things you could rip off to get guitar lessons or to meet up for this and stuff. I remember, like, it was all visceral hearing you describe that.
And growing up in Alabama, I also went to college in Auburn. So
wow.
You now have reduced your gaming crowd even more. Yeah. And the gaming group was an anime/gaming group because there weren't enough members to have one or the other. You have to have them both together, which is also where I just discovered a great love of anime. So it worked out well overall. So having to do that means that you're then at the mercy of whatever that group is. And entering any new group is always hard. Right. It doesn't matter if you're the friendliest person, if you're not. It's awkward for 3 to 6 months before you all get a good feel for each other. Mm-hmm. Layer on top of that, either conscious or subconscious racism that you have to engage with. And even if you go to a group of 6, if 5 of those assholes are cool, there's usually one. I'm sorry, can I curse on your pod on this?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Thank you. There's usually one motherfucker that's not, that then taints the pool of people because they've been there longer. And it's easier for people to acquiesce to that than fight against it. So you have to deal with that internal struggle. Later in life, I was running my own games. I had someone join my game, come to my house, playing a Star Wars game. And there was a roll that they didn't like because they rolled a 1 when they should have got a 20 when they really needed a 20. And he had the audacity in my house to my face to say the N-word to me.
Are you shitting me?
I did not pummel or beat this person about the face, because that would have just meant I would have gone to jail and that person would have been fine.
Yeah.
Instead, I politely asked them to leave and they were never welcome back in my home again. And then they emailed me a couple of days later saying, "Hey man, what's the problem?" A multitude of stories like this.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, this is obviously more than just for this podcast, right? This is a subject that could, books and books are written about. But every time, Chris, that I have these conversations with guests who have very different experiences than I do, I am amazed at what I never saw. And it is really incredible for me and generous of you to tell these stories, because quite frankly, I just never saw that, right? Well, that's not true. I would encounter it at times, but it was never directed at me. And there was often times where, because of how I look, it was assumed that certain conversations or certain things could be said. Head snapping when that would happen. And I had some of it in my family too. that was just utterly shocking. It often, when I talk to people though, Chris, where they talk about, the hobby was an escape for them. It was a shelter for them, a place for them to go where they could get away from the struggles of the real world, right? But it doesn't sound like that gaming was that for you.
Mm-mm. Not at all. Even still not to today.
Yeah.
And before we go on, I won't say who, but it's just not gamers. They're also publishers and people in the industry that are the same way.
When you sit down and say, okay, I want to create Harlem Unbound, do you start off with, this is what I want to accomplish? Or is it you start creating and then the purpose of this work starts to form? Does that question make sense? What comes first?
It does. It depends on if it is a Darker Hue project or another company's project.
Well, let's talk about specifically for Harlem Unbound.
For Harlem Unbound, it was more of I wanted to honor my cousin in a game that I love. And I already had a big knowledge of Harlem, and I knew that Harlem wasn't something that Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu, I will speak specifically to Chaosium because that is what the Cthulhu I was playing, had really engaged with. I know that Mark and Lynn were the closest ones to do anything with Harlem, and they made Dead Man Stomp, which written by two white dudes. Mark, my buddy, I love him like the older brother I never had, is from Australia, and Lynn are both older white gentlemen. And so they're writing a story about Harlem, and it was written in the 90s. So it still had that obstacle to overcome. But I salute both of them for trying to take on that challenge. And they tried to address it as best they could. Because first, the biggest thing you have to remember for anything that's being created is you have the creators who are making something. Those creators then have to go through an editor. Then that editor has to go through like their own internal policies. And then the publisher has to publish it. So whatever they make is not going to be the same from step 1 to step 10. So it has to adhere to whatever Chaosium's brand was in the 90s, which I think could use some serious work, which is why I was a motivator for me to try to go and do that work. And I had the privilege now of saying that I got to work on the most recent release of Dead Man Stomp with my buddy Mark. So that is like my biggest goal, one of my big goals for the gaming industry. I can now retire entirely from the TPDR industry because I've worked with Mark, which I wanted to do. I've worked on Dune, which I wanted to do, and I've written for Doctor Who, which I wanted to do, and I have my name on the book for Chaosium, which I wanted to do. There's like one thing left, but I'm like, really? I could call it a day and just go play video games with my free time.
So with Harlem Unbound, Chris, was it a scenario where you started work on it and then approached Chaosium, or did you approach Chaosium and say, I would like to start work on this? Can I get an idea of how that connection happened?
I first wrote it in a more system neutral way. And I created like a 30-page, I guess pamphlet would be the best way to put it, like a little demo copy. And I put like my big thing on it. Nah, not for publication or release without written permission of Chris Spivey. Because this is for all you future designers and designers out there working. Do not do what I did. Do not send someone your idea, your concept, or anything. In a more established industry, they would not read it. Because if they read it and they make something like it, you can sue them. The gaming industry at that point in time, I don't think had that. I don't know. I was still trying to get in, but I know that I got a lot of rejection letters saying that this doesn't meet our brand. It's not what we would do. No one would want to read about this. You shouldn't really talk about racism in gaming because it is a chance for people to escape in a light fare, and they don't want to deal with real world stuff. And I got that for about a year.
Wow.
And then I do what Chris does. And I said, fuck you. I just do it myself.
When does Chaosium become part of the process then?
I knew that Chaosium had third-party publishers. And I wanted the book to hit Mythos fans to help address, because part of the book is literally discussing Lovecraft's racism and racism in gaming. And having Chaosium on the book, this is like not the designer, but the business hat thinking that Chaosium in the book means I'll sell more books and I'll have a greater impact. And if Chaosium cared to even bother to retweet or share it, that will get even more impact. But I knew that it had to be good to get their buy off on it, which I already wanted to be good. So that is an extra layer of pressure on me to make it better than it already would have been awesome. And so after I had a lot of it together, I approached them again and said, hey, I don't want you to publish it. I want you to be a third party. I want to use your system because I don't want to make my own. And then I also talked to Pilgrim Press, who I'd written for, at that point of time, I think, Out of the Woods. It's a mythos scenario that deals with adventures only set in the woods. And for them, I wrote, God, what was it? $30 a day or something, because it was about the CCC workers in the 1930s out in the woods and they encounter something. I think it's a good scenario. It's a great book. You should go buy it. There you go. Pelgrain, I helped you out.
So when you approach Chaosium the second time, what do they say?
Eventually they said yes, because this is when Chaosium had their entire change in management. This is after it's public knowledge. So their dubious Kickstarter with Horror on the Orient Express, where they'd overpromised things. They had almost went bankrupt. They did an entire reshuffling and they got brand new management. This is the current management that's in now. And that management, I think, was still trying to figure out what was going on. And I think they might have just wanted more books in the world that had Call of Cthulhu. And they were like, sure, unknown writer that had maybe 3 titles to your name. What's the worst damage you could possibly do? Little did they know.
So as you're creating this, Chris, you come into it with a voice. You come into it with some very clear goals. Of what you want to accomplish with this work. As you're creating it and then putting the end cap on it, did any of that change, or did you learn anything, or what came out of the process of making Harlem Unbound? Anything?
Jesus. I went in knowing nothing about game development. Sorry, nothing about official business game development. I came out with a solid 50% knowledge base.
What were those big learnings for you? What were the big shockers in that process?
For one, how people don't, if it's not your baby, no one will care about it as much as you do. Hands down. So deadlines are great things, but not everyone wants to adhere to them. Some people consider them a good suggestion. And then you have to spend more time haranguing people to turn in their work than what you do actually doing the work. And for all of that, I will say that I got lucky making Harlem Unbound, because I got an invite from Evie, who did Metatopia in 2014, 2015. She reached out to me and said, hey, we heard you're a new game designer. Metatopia is this big thing that does this, and this. I'll give you a free ticket if you want to come to Jersey. And I was like, really, Jersey? And
it better be free.
So I said, sure. Thanks for the invite. I'm happy to come. Joey aside, I was happy to go and meet and talk to the people. And my name popped up on the list. And when my name popped on the list, Brennan Reese emailed me. So out of the blue, I had someone called Brennan email me and said, hey, are you the Chris Spivey from Auburn, Alabama? And I responded with, why, yes, random internet stranger. I am Chris Spivey from Auburn, Alabama. End of email. And then he sent a more forwarded email saying, hey, I'm Brennan. This is when we went to school together. We didn't really hang out. I'll be at Metatopia. This is what I do. Yada, yada, yada. If you want to talk, let me know. And then I got his name and reference points. I went back and I researched him and said, hey, it's that guy that I never really talked to because we're in very different circles. And then
so what happens when you connect with him?
So we ended up having, was it whiskey or scotch? Either way, we had many good drinks together over the course of 4 hours, I think. And I told him my vision, and he really got on board with it and was really resonating with it. And Brennan is an amazing graphic designer and artist. So Brennan was the first person to join onto the project. So I had amazing graphic designer artist with industry knowledge. You had visionary that doesn't understand the word no and won't stop. So it was kind of a, I don't want to say the Wonder Twins, because I would be the person to force the blast to turn into the bucket of water, and Brennan would get to turn it to the animals. But we were a great duo together.
So I got an odd question for you, Chris. So I've got Harlem
It's
Unbound.
not the first one.
I've got Harlem Unbound. Gorgeous book. Really enjoyed reading it. I've never run it. I would have bought it a year ago, so I'm not sure. I'd have to look. I assume the most.
What's the
recent
cover
one.
look like? You know,
if you're
if you're going to ask me awkward questions, I'm going to ask you awkward questions. Is the cover red? Is the cover orange? Is it thick? Is it small?
No, it's pretty good sized. Pretty good size, and it's got a darker cover. It's over on my bookshelf. So what edition does that make it?
I don't know. We're going to have an awkward moment unless you go look.
Okay, give me a second. I'll be right back.
So, folks, it's just you and me right now on the podcast while Craig's gone. His headphones are off, so he can't hear this. If you could ask me any question, what would it be? You could hop in my Discord and ask those questions. But otherwise, I would say I bet Craig has the second edition Harlem Unbound book because first edition only had a print run of 1,000 books, and those sold out pretty quick. Let's wait and see. I'm curious if you'll come and edit this, or will he realize that I've said anything the whole time? I don't know if I should tell him or not. We'll find out shortly as we go ahead. An insider secret while we're waiting for Craig to come back. Making Harlem Unbound actually got me a speaking engagement at a university that flew me down to join a conference for a week. And I got to present an entire demo about Harlem Unbound, the gaming industry. And then I get to run a demo game for a group of people. Oh, Craig's back.
All right, good news and bad news. Not sure where my Unbound is, but I did find this damn thing. Talk about big book. And
so I've got to know, do you edit the dead space while you were gone, or was it going to stay?
Oh, it'll stay. So I'll hear whatever you were talking about. I saw your lips moving.
See, I admit to being an asshole because my copy is right here. Is this the one that you have?
So that I don't think so.
That's the second edition. You have first edition.
Oh, okay, great. Fantastic. I like that cover though on the second edition.
You would be one of the few people that say that.
Really?
Generally, people like the red and black cover better, which since there are going to be two different editions of the book, I made a specific designer choice. I wanted two different covers because each book has a different feel to them. Mm-hmm. Just from the approach I was taking and making.
So this is going to lead to, if I've got first edition, then other than the fact that I love the cover, what do I get when I go and buy second edition tomorrow?
A lot of stuff. So first edition, though, has its dual status for first edition. So you can run it with Gumshoe or Chaosium.
I remember that.
And it has a Gumshoe system in it. So it counts as a core book. Because one of the points I wanted to do with Harlem Unbound, growing up poor in Alabama, like dirt poor, I didn't have a lot of money for games. And I wanted to make sure that any game I made would have everything you need to run it.
Right.
Like you only need to make one purchase. And you could do that with the Gumshoe system, which is one of the reasons why I approached Pelgrain, because they sort of had an open-ish license. And I was like, hey, I really want to include it here. I'm also working with Chaosium. Chaosium's is not. I cannot do that. This is before Chaosium, I think, is now joined. Is it the Orc license or whatever that is?
Yeah. Yeah. This
is almost a decade before that. Man, decade. Listen how that sounds. Decade. And so you would get the Gumshoe system, and you would also get Harlem Nights in first edition. For second edition, I wanted first edition to have a few things that second edition didn't have, because I was also going to improve second edition, because I learned a lot from first edition to second edition, and I wanted to implement those new things.
What were those things?
I cut Harlem Nights. So second edition does not have Harlem Nights.
Okay.
And since it was a Chaosium specific book, it can no longer have Gumshoe. So I got to remove all the Gumshoe stuff, which gave me a lot of room to play with, because I think people have realized I am not afraid of word usage and page count. So Chaosium said, your book cannot be larger than this. And I was like, well, what if it's this large? And they said, all right, but it cannot be larger than this. I said, well, what if it's this large? No. It's like, all right, I pushed you as far as I could push you. Let me see if I can hit that limit. So in second edition, I added so many things, actually. We cleaned up some of the grammar. There was one or two things in the first edition that slipped by me as an editor that I wanted to remove. I made sure those are the first things were removed.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Chaosium was trained to figure out how they were doing quotes at the time. So I had to cut a lot of the quotes that are in first edition that I worked hard to get. So there you have no quote in second edition, but it is compensated by an extra 3 scenarios, I think, maybe 4 scenarios.
Very
I
cool.
went back and I totally I revised about 40% of the scenarios that I wrote for it. So if you're going to run Harlem Hellfighters Never Die, you should run second edition. I love that one more. I added in the subplot that I cut in the first one because I didn't have enough time. And for instance, the new scenarios, did you get Whispers of Harlem? That was a backer kit exclusive for first edition. Some PDF if you backed it, if not, but I included that in second edition and I cleaned it up some. So you get Whispers of Harlem. You've got a Ode to the Law scenario. You've got that Jazz Craze scenario. And I feel that there is one more that is eluding me. Yes. I forgot the name of Stephanie's scenario, but it happens in Harlem. So you got a scenario that happens in like 1588.
Oh, wow.
Bam. So 4 new scenarios. I've added an entire new section about like the daily life in Harlem, like on the street, that has a great vibe to it that Ariel wrote. Ariel, amazing. And some other bits and pieces. So a lot of stuff.
Oh, good. I got something to look forward to then. So
it's almost like a totally new book.
Yeah.
All Chaosium did when they did it, they said, hey, we want a we would like to make Harlem Unbound 2.0. And I guess they thought I was just going to like send them the book and they're going to reprint it. No, I am an autiste. And right now I have an idea for what Harlem Unbound 3rd edition could be. But that wouldn't happen for like 20 years or when people have forgotten about it. And I've retired from gaming and I said, hey, I want to do one more book.
So I get my copy of second edition, read through it with all the extra scenarios, and I want to sit down and I want to run the game.
Mm-hmm.
What do I need to think about as the GM running one of those scenarios?
Do you want to have fun?
Yeah.
There you go. Like, what else are you expecting some other answer?
Well, I don't know. So here's the question for it, right? So it's a very specific voice. As part of what I really enjoyed about the first edition and reading through it, it was talking about that period of time in a way that I had not seen in a gaming book before, right? And it touched on, especially the jazz scenario, touched on some pretty hardcore shit, and in a very good way, right? Is there anything that I should keep in mind as I run it, or do I treat it just like any other scenario? Am I making sense, Chris? I don't know if I'm connecting or not.
You are, but remember, at the very start, I said I was going to make it a little difficult at points, and I make it a little difficult for you right now. So in the book itself, I include an entire section about that already in first edition and second edition, like those things you should consider and think about, and lay out potential points you should do for second edition, because I had so many publicly private emails, I will not call you people out, that contacted me saying, hey, I'm a white GM and I don't think I can run this game. I bought it for you. I support you. I put it on my shelf. Thank you for your money. But that is not what I want, because that doesn't share the book, doesn't get the people to read the book. That doesn't do the mission. You gave me a couple dollars, I can buy a beer like the one I just promoted on the podcast. What I want, though, rather than that, I want you to run it. I want, if you make mistakes, apologize for your mistakes. They may or may not accept it, but learn from it and do better. Because if you're running games, you're going to be running games for anywhere from a year to like the rest of your life. Those are dozens to hundreds of people that you will game with, who will then go out and influence more people. And that is a message. That is like what I'm trying to accomplish. And so for second edition, I put in a specific piece for those GMs that say that basically more eloquently says what I just babbled on about here.
Right.
Like, do the work. I'm not going to do it for you. You do the work. You've got privilege. You've got all these things. You doing it is safer and has more impact than me doing it.
Interesting. You're randomly walking down the street, Chris. Someone bumps into you and says, hey, are you Chris Spivey, the guy that made Harlem Unbound? And
nope.
You say, yeah, not me, right? They recognize you, though. What is the next thing they could say about Harlem Unbound that would make you feel good? Make you know that, you know what, I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish with this book? What is something that they could say to you at that moment that would tell you that?
That is very difficult because if you meet me at a con and we have not met or engaged before, I will be polite and quickly leave that conversation.
Okay.
Because there is an element of danger associated with me being in that situation with you. I don't know you. And if something goes sideways, it will go sideways in your favor.
Interesting.
So if you decide that you want to attack me, if I defend myself when the police show up, I am usually at fault 8 out of 10 times. And
how do you get past that then?
You be polite and you go about your day. It depends on who you are. For me, growing up in Alabama, I am influenced by growing up there. So I have very much a aura of aloofness that I use. And a lot of people are usually put off by it. But it's a self-defense mechanism. But like if I know you, I will happily sit around and do what we're doing right now.
So I guess my question is then how does somebody get past that with you though, Chris? So how does somebody quote unquote get to know you?
I don't know. It depends on the person. A lot of it depends on the people because you can read a situation usually. And I know that I've had people come up to me and ask me to sign a book. I'll sign a book for them. I am of course awkward. I was like, why do you want me to sign your book? Like for Cthulhu Confidential that you just held up. Yep. Someone came and said, hey, Chris, would you sign my book? I'm like, do you want me to sign it? Robin's like right there. I think I saw Ruth on the other side of the hall. And so, but it is awkward, much like now, like even when you email saying, hey, like interview, have you come on the show and we do a little talk, felt weird to me because I am mostly just a dude that loves history and wants other people to love history and understand the pros and cons of it.
Okay. So why was it weird to get that email from me? What was weird about it?
I usually don't get a lot of, I guess, interview offers is the best way to put it.
Interesting. What made you say yes?
I checked out some of your other podcasts. Checked out some of your other videos, basically.
And what did that tell you that it would be okay to come on?
I liked your vibe enough that I'd give it a shot. I had someone reach out to me before, and I will not say who this person was. I will not even gender them. But they said, hey, I got a new podcast. You can come on my podcast. I was like, sure. No one really asked me anyway. Why not? Hey, let's hang out. And I went. They were more awkward than me, which is an accomplishment of itself. And then it was 10 minutes of them doing and saying things they really shouldn't.
Really?
And I ended the podcast at like 12 minutes and said, hey, I think that you don't really know who I am or the work that I do. How about we just stop? And I would suggest that you like delete this so you don't look bad and maybe take a few moments to like check out some of this stuff and like reference that and grow a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm even more complimented that you decided to spend time with us. So guys, we're going to take a break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about one of the big books that I held up to show Chris. And when I say big books, if you have not seen it, you can go to my Twitter feed and find it when I got it in the mail. We're going to talk about Haunted West. We'll be right back. Are you enjoying our long-form interviews with creatives on this podcast? Maybe you're craving deeper discussions about our guests or some of the RPG plays on our Twitch and YouTube channel. Well, I've got an opportunity for you. You see, Third Floor Wars now has a Patreon-only Discord server. You can join a vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts diving deep into every episode of our RPG plays and podcast. Connect with fans, engage in spirited discussions, and unlock the behind-the-scenes insights. For just $1 a month, access a world of tabletop gaming goodness. Connect with passionate gamers who share your love for the Tabletop Podcast and everything produced on the third floor. As a Patreon supporter, you also enjoy ad-free episodes of this podcast. You can immerse yourselves in captivating stories and fascinating interviews without interruptions, taking your listening experience to a whole new level. By joining the Third Floor Wars Patreon community, you not only gain exclusive access to the Patreon-only Discord server, but you also support the growth of my podcast and channels. Your contributions enable me to continue creating high-quality content that entertains, educates, and upskills tabletop enthusiasts like yourself. Maybe don't wait. Join the Third Floor Wars Patreon today and unlock a world of camaraderie, discussions, and knowledge. Visit patreon.com/Third Floor Wars or check the link in the show notes and come join our community. The Third Floor Wars Patreon-only Discord server awaits you. I and the other patrons can't wait to welcome you with open arms and a fistful of dice. When does Haunted West start calling to you? When do you start thinking, I've got stories to tell, and I've got a voice that ends up becoming Haunted West?
So even when I was making the first edition of Harlem Unbound, I kept coming with ideas. So I jotted some down. And then when I was making the second edition of our Harlem Unbound, I had 8 different ideas that I had to stop working on the second edition and spec out spines for. And I had 8 different, actually about 11 different spines for different game books. And I got back to working. And even though I was working, Haunted West kept like sort of riding up and trying to get me to sit at the saloon with it. Until eventually I just said, all right, this is the next thing I'm going to do. I need to do it, but if I'm going to do it, I need to do it right. I need to assemble the right team, because it was going to be a massive undertaking. I didn't know how massive, because I didn't know that COVID was going to strike right when the Kickstarter ended, basically.
Wow.
I also didn't know that during the Kickstarter, we started the Kickstarter, and within 3 hours, that's when the Kickstarter union strike happened.
No shit.
So it suddenly became cursed from the jump. And then I had a whole mess, and I still get them, of the Deadlands and Down Darker Trails fans and Dark Trails people coming out constantly attacking me and trying to review bomb me.
You say, all right, that's it. Fine, Haunted West. I'll come to the saloon. I'll start working on you. What is next? So when you make the decision, I'm going to create this game, what do you do next? You said, did you immediately go to start assembling the team? What happens?
So you asked about which comes first, like the book or the mission. For Harlem Unbound, the book came first, then the mission. Haunted West, the mission came first, because there was so much history to attack and try to get into and delve, compared to Harlem Unbound, which is still a history-intensive book, but it's a history-intensive book for 10, maybe 15 years. Even if we go and start at like the beginning of time, how I love to do, and work our way all the way up to it, it is a finite, focused amount of time for Harlem Unbound. Haunted West, the Old West, is still a blink of the eye of time, but it is decades of time. And so much of the world changed. And even making Haunted West, the primary focus, about 95%, is on what would become America. But another 5 to 10%, because the book is so large, it's about 120%, is on the rest of the world. And we include information about what the rest of the world is doing at that time and how it interacts with what is America. And we start almost at the beginning of time, and we move forward. And unlike Harlem Unbound, which I sort of interweaved some fake history to, like the mythos history and everything else, or the actual history, it was too important for Haunted West to do that. So Haunted West, we dedicate a lot of book space to honest to God history that is weirder than the Weird West stuff that you see, but it's historically accurate. Yeah. Because I knew there'd be so many people saying, well, that didn't happen. It's a fantasy book. No, we're giving you actual history, so you can't say this is fantasy. I make a whole section that's just history. There ain't nothing fantasy about it. When you read it, like, this is the history. This is the world. These were the atrocities that happened. These were the monumental feats that we accomplished. This is a horrible shit your people did. This is some of the shit my people did. This is some of the shit those people did. Like, no one's hands are clean, but other people's hands are dirtier than most. And all that had to be told and need to be clarified. and stressed. And even the language that we chose for Harlem Unbound, like I think I saw a post recently where someone specifically points out that we use the term colonizer, invader, because that's what happened. There were already people living here before they came over and decimated them to then make it America.
Yeah.
That's an invasion.
You're calling it what it is. Exactly. So, and Chris, I haven't finished reading the history piece in Haunted West. It's huge. And I would say in the
150 pages.
Yeah, it's large. But even in the first 15 to 20 pages, I was struck with, and I've had this happen several times with other pieces of work where it's like, I didn't know any of this shit. Like nobody ever told me any of this stuff. I've never come across this before. For you, how much of this was new? So how much of this was stuff that you ended up researching for the book and discovered, or did you really have a strong sense of this untold history before you even started?
That is a very difficult question. So I grew up watching Westerns with my grandmother because that is her favorite thing. So originally I hated it growing up because I wanted to watch cartoons on Saturday morning. She's like, why don't you watch Westerns? And I grew up poor. So in Alabama, we had like the big color TV on the bottom that didn't work and a little black and white TV on top of it that did work. And I was a kid. So whatever she wanted, we kind of did because it was her house. And I eventually grew to love Westerns with her, but they always felt wrong because anyone that looked like me or marginalized was usually like an enslaved person, a joke. And the Southern Reb was always a hero of their pieces, which even then, really? Aren't you the people that fought to enslave people? How are you a hero? So that always stayed with me, but always felt off. And I researched a little bit. And so I knew a lot of it, but I did not know all of it. And that's when I even before we started talking about Haunted West, I pointed out specifically, I had to assemble the right team. So I came up with an idea of what I thought like the spine of the book would be. And then I went out and assembled the largest team of diverse, creative people I think at that point in time had been on a project from all different backgrounds. Because I wasn't just telling a Black or African-American story. I was telling the story of the fucking West, the story of the world that was here before it became the West. And I could not do that by myself. Let me rephrase that. I could do that by myself, but that would make me as bad as everyone else. And I'm trying to show and tell stories about. I needed people to come in to help tell their stories from their backgrounds, their perspectives, and help shape the book. And I will say hands down, this book could not have happened without the team of people I assembled. And off the top of my head, I will give a special shout out to Angel. They are astounding. They educated me. They helped revise the book. They were a proofreader, a sensitivity reader. They gave me insight into the indigenous nations that I would have no points of reference for. And they made the book so much better. And a shout out to Jen Kretschmer, who went in and helped revise, whose input made me redo an entire section of character creation because it wasn't right. And Evan Perlman carried a heavy weight of doing some of the mechanical stuff and making sure that it worked out well. Like, unbelievably important. I remember the book. I just shout them out because I recently interacted with them.
So,
and
I want to go.
Sorry, one more.
Please.
And Natasha, the designer of the book, when I had to change designers of the book, stepped in, even though she saw how massive this undertaking would be and knew that she would be living in my basement for a year, didn't flinch, jumped in, and I paid her what we pay as TTRPG industry people in peanuts and affection. Like, way to go.
all that big RPG money. So I've got a lot of questions now. Let's start off with going back to your grandmother's living room. So you said you ended up falling in love with Westerns, but something seemed off. The something seemed off seems pretty obvious to me because you delved into that. What I didn't hear is why you fell in love with it.
The stories. It's being able to go somewhere and reinvent yourself and help shape the destiny of a place. I think one of the reasons I'll say it like this, specifically in quotes, but the American West is so idealized is that it was a time where you could move one town over and become a new person. You could go and change the entire course of your destiny and estate through like hard work, sometimes atrocious deeds, but there's so much change and potential in the wind. Like it was almost a time of magic. And those Westerns encapsulated bits and snippets of it, but not the full story. And the sad part about them is they focus more on the gunplay and everything else. Wordplay was unbelievably important. And like the clothing that they wore, even then, was bright and colorful. And you don't see that in Westerns. You see like dark drab colors. Their motherfuckers running like a light blue shirt and pink pants and all this other stuff. And it was there because that's what they were doing. And it's magic.
So when you look at the genre today, movies that have been made in the last 15, 20 years, I'm sure we could have a long list of movies that miss the mark for you, right? That don't showcase what you love about the genre. Is there any movies that did?
So movies is harder. I will say that I'm going to rephrase that. I'm going to reframe that for myself.
Yeah.
The 5 inspirational Western pieces for the book, for me, and specifically Western, not other influences, not like, that's a joke for the Discord group. I'm not gonna tell you that one, but like High Noon was, I don't know if you can see High Noon, but High Noon is all throughout that book. And if anyone that knows the history of High Noon and what Gary Cooper and everyone in that movie had to endure to make it, like go read High Noon and what they went through. Funnily enough, God, I forgot what it's called now. It's that horrible weird Western with Wesley Snipes in it. God.
Hold on. I'm going to Google it because I know what you're talking about.
It is so bad, but it has nuggets that I like infused into the book. Deadwood.
Is it Gallow Walkers?
Yes, that's it. Gallow Walkers. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And the last one, ooh, that's hard. There were so many, but it would probably be Django Unchained / The Hateful Eight.
You said it's
because
harder with
The
movies.
Harder They Fall came out after the book was released and published.
Which I have not seen. Harder They Fall. Is it good?
I think they saw I was working on a book and they went, "Hey, that Chris Spivey, we're not going to pay that guy any money, but
we're going to go ahead and put this movie out." You said it's harder with movies. That's inferring that there's other media where that you think have been successful. Is that the case? Are there books or other things that you think have really kind of captured what you view as the West?
To some extent, I would say more television shows, for instance, like it's hit and miss, but Deadwood, regardless of what you say, is like the essential for the Western. It is hands down watching. Like the wordplay, and everything else. There was violence, but gun violence should be like that. It should be dramatic and strike, but then it goes back to building up to that. And you have a community that you're trying to build. The first season of Hell on Wheels. I could jump back to Roots, which is technically a Western. And
I never thought about it, but you're right.
Those sort of all encapsulated. And it's the one with Danny Glover. Dove.
Lonesome Dove?
Because yes. Like that.
Great book, by the way.
Very solid Westerns.
Yeah.
Because in case people didn't know, part of the things about creating a book, if you noticed, I mentioned I started Harlem Unbound in 2011. Harlem Unbound, I think, was published in Kickstarter 2015. It came out in 2017. Haunted West, I started maybe in 2018, came out in 2022. So there, as a indie publisher, like when you say Dark Horse Studios, it is me and a couple other freelancers when I can occasionally afford to pay them a decent wage to come and help me.
Yeah.
So it takes time. So when you get a book, I've already like processed all that and I've moved on to the next thing. So I'm having to like go through the archives to find stuff. Like,
and I always feel bad when I have creators on, Chris, for that exact reason, right? So there's things that I want to talk about that are long shipped past, right? Because by the time we get our hands on it, you've already moved on. You've already started, let alone, come on a podcast 3 years after it's been published. So the next thing I want to talk about, Chris, is made a point.
Can I tell you? I want one more point about this.
Yeah.
So Haunted West, like I mentioned, the Kickstarter union strike happened. which greatly impacted who wanted to back us. And a lot of the comments on Kickstarter was, I would back your project, but the union strike is going. Even though the union striker said, hey, we want you to back projects because you backing them helps us. People ignored that to make negative comments. And when it ended, that's when ended, I want to say in December, we learned about COVID was in January or February. And that's when COVID fully hit. So the entire book of Haunted West came out during COVID. Like, I had writers working on it, and we all know the trauma that we're going through then. So you're trying to ask creatives to create in a traumatic environment. And then the cost of printing times 10 the original cost. So I want people to understand what a harrowing experience it was for indie publishers, all indie publishers, just not me and an 806-page book they're trying to publish during a pandemic where costs are times 10 from when they originally spec'd them out. So when you're thinking about something, think about all the hard work that they put into it and how much they had to suffer from that. There are now indie people that are out of the industry because they can't afford to be here anymore because they don't make big sales. They depend on that Kickstarter and any sales they get afterwards. And negative comments destroy them because that stops people from buying their products. So if you want to help an indie publisher, retweet them, talk highly about them. If you're going to buy a book from a large company, like buy an indie book at the same time. If you can't afford to buy both, buy the big book and say that, hey, I bought this, but I really love this, and I hope to buy this next week, and tweet that company and the larger people to shame the larger company into retweeting the smaller company. Like, be an active force for good to help indie publishers. Sorry, you had a more relevant point before I went on my
No, it's an extremely relevant point, and it's a point I've been making a version of that point for a long time, Chris, which is you don't have to worry about amplifying the critics. They take care of that themselves. People that don't like something, they'll make sure to let you know. So you don't have to worry about that. The silence is from all of those, and I'm included, that read something and go, that was really good, and do nothing about it. And one of my big soapboxes that I try to get on all the time is if you like something, say it. Say it to the world, say it to a friend, and reach out to the creator. Let them know too. Every once in a while, Chris, I will get a kind comment on my YouTube channel. Somebody will send me an email after listening to an episode. For every 10 nasty grams that I get one that just makes it all go away. And just the impact is huge. And so I'm behind that point 100%. And
I guess one more tidbit. Sorry. I told you before we started, I'm all about tangents.
This is my hell, by the way, Chris.
I would say their name, but I don't know if they want me to. So I will say thank you to ML, someone randomly off the internet that downloaded a Harlem Unbound character sheet and saw that it wasn't form filling and calculatable and went through, made their own version of it and sent it to me and said I could release it publicly.
How cool
I haven't done it
that?
yet because I just got it, and I got to make sure it's okay before I do it. But thank you for doing that. That is ultimate support. I have no idea how to make a formidable calculator character sheet. I would have to find someone else, pay them money to do it that I don't have because I'm an indie publisher, which we just talked about. And that helps me immensely. Be the change.
Well, not only that, Chris, but it's a huge compliment, right? Because I think one of the greatest compliments that you can get as a creator is when you inspire them to create. Which is exactly what you just talked about, right? This person, ML, loved your game enough to put the time and the effort in to make a form fillable character sheet. And that's a big compliment and just really, really cool. You talked about assembling the team, Chris. You talked about being very methodical about that because there were voices that needed to be in your book that couldn't be your voice. And you also spoke about learning in that process. And I imagine that we could spend 5 hours talking about the stuff that was then submitted to you that you were like, holy shit, I've learned so much, but, and we're not going to do that. But is there any one or two that really stand out to you that when you got that back from that contributor, you read it and went, oh my God?
There are multiple pieces from different people. I've mentioned two of them already. I'll let you figure out for yourself which one, but I think this should be pretty obvious. And I guess I want to take a minute to say that I joke a lot and I do humble brags because that is what I'm inclined to do. But regardless of anything, while I say that as an indie publisher, I don't make a lot of money, I was astounded by the fact that when I reached out to these people, they quickly said yes to come work with me for an okay pay per word rate. I paid them more than what Chaosium or Pelgrane or White Wolf or anyone else paid me, but it's still not what we should be making. But the TTRPG industry makes nothing for small companies, and they quickly said yes. So,
do you know why?
Do
you know why they said yes so quickly? Did they tell you?
They said that they wanted to work with me. And that was like, I think, one of the biggest compliments I could have received.
Yeah.
Which is extra pressure than not to fuck up.
So you assemble this team, and I would like to get a sense of Chris. Go ahead.
Sorry, to that. I'm going to tell you a bit that we could have got to later, but I want to specifically put it here.
Yeah.
So in the midst of the book, lots of stuff way behind where I want to be because I wanted to release the book at a certain point in time. COVID, not going to happen. And so I sent an email to Ken Height, and say, hey, Ken, I need you to start the basic snippets for the equipment section. Can you do that? And I get an email back from Ken saying, Chris, did you just ask me to write Old West equipment? Like, that's it. Like, it wasn't said that, do you know who I am? And I sent back saying, Ken, yes, I will not need to double check your Old West equipment because it will be historically accurate. And I got back a true. Because one of the points that I did learn making Harlem Unbound is everything that's submitted, I need to go back and quadruple check it. Which is why the book also took an extra 6 months to come out, because I wanted to be more certain of this, because I joked before about not fucking up for the team, but I didn't want to fuck up because I'm trying to tell people actual history to get them to play actual history and go out in the world and make a change. Mm-hmm. So I can't give you shoddy material to do that with.
It would be very quick for someone to attack the credibility, right? Because of the loftiness and the clarity of the goal that you put behind this book, that it makes it very vulnerable in that way. So I could definitely appreciate that pressure to make it accurate. So I'm going to ask the question again.
Nope. Look, I'm still tangenting. And now I'm only writing books about fuzzy kittens. And they're going to be weird, like fantasy kittens. So you can't research it and find out if I'm right or wrong because I made them up.
It's all fake. So going back to the question that started this, though, Chris, I really would like to get a sense of what you learned about history in the process of making the book. You came into it with some knowledge. You researched some of it on your own. You had people that were creating with their own unique voice, and it was coming back to you. I want to get a sense from the start to when the book gets shipped. When you look back on it, what are some of the bigger things that you learned about the history of the Old West?
Two of the big pieces are going to be related to Angel and learning about different indigenous cultures, about like how the difference between Light Horse, who was law enforcement for specific groups, compared to like, I don't want to mess it up because I'm tired and I'm drinking, but like healing circles, and from Jen Kretschmer about like the creation of wheelchairs and other prosthetics, because during Civil War, a lot of people suffered horrible damage and they lost limbs and everything else. And like that cycle of how the government sort of reacted to that. And Jen created a great piece about that. And we had mechanics and trying everything else to fully incorporate that. And Jen went through our mechanics, told us some stuff that would be wrong. And so I stripped it. I redid stuff and I put it back to Jen to review, because that's not something that I know. It is not my story. And I could have a historical point of reference, but I need someone who knows it, lives it, and that is their story. And that's the heart of it.
That's very, very cool. So guys, we're going to take one more break. When we get done with this break, we're going to come back to one of my favorite segments of the show, something we've kind of touched on a little bit. I want to find out what Chris is grooving on. This is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content that you're listening to right now for free. That pitchman explains by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the third floor, we refuse to interrupt your episode of Tabletop Talk with such time-wasting pleas. We pledge never to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month, because supporting content creators keeps the content coming, even if there is a link in the show's description. And there is. We don't ask you to click it and become a patron. We don't waste time rambling about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting episodes without ad breaks like this, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode knowing Tabletop Talk, despite being supported by its patrons, won't engage in such blatant appeals for support. So, Chris, this last segment is something that just slowly, organically started appearing in my show over the last couple of years. And what I found myself doing with creators being, and we did it a little bit in some of the previous sections, I love hearing what you consume, right? So what is work by other people that have influenced and put its hooks into you the way you want your work to put hooks into someone else? So I'd love to find out, Chris, if there's anything recently, a book, movie, TV series, something that got its hooks into you and wouldn't let go.
I'm going to say this Gonzo Imperial Porter from Willet. That's a barreled aged beer. Oh, you mean like.
By the way, if you enjoy spirits and you enjoy good beer, you've got to follow Chris on Twitter. You got to follow. He's so good about saying, and this is what I'm doing tonight. And this is the accompaniment.
I don't know if you've been online, but I may have posted one actually tonight. If we're talking non-ingestible, technically, I guess I could eat a TV, but that would go back to a matter eater lad joke that I will not make on the podcast. Honestly, Into this Across the Spider-Verse was astonishing. Oh. So I will tell you a moment of me being a bad parent. That is too late because my daughter's in summer now. So when Across the Spider-Verse was going to air, I'm still very anxious about COVID. So instead, I bought us tickets for like the Thursday show at noon, like 1 or whenever it was. And I checked her out of school at 11 because she was sick.
I love you.
Sick. And we walked around the mall. I got a lunch. Then we went and we watched Across the Spider-Verse together. And she loved it. And he was like, when it ended, in case you don't know, I guess skip the podcast 5 seconds. It's a cliffhanger. It's a part 1 of a movie. And she was like, what the? And then she had the joy, having already seen it, and my wife hadn't seen it, that we took my wife to go see it. And she said, Mommy, you're going to love this movie. This is what happens now. Mommy, I'll hold your hand because this part's scary. Oh, mwah.
So off mic, audience, real quick, before we started recording, we did a little pre-talk in the green room. And one of the things that I talked to Chris about is how I also have a 9-year-old daughter, which a lot of you guys already know, Cecilia. And I say that I always enjoy reading your Twitter feed when you talk about your 9-year-old, right, in your Twitter feed. And this is a little crazy. So movies have always been Cecilia and I's thing. That's what Daddy and Cecilia do. So anything that's age appropriate, I don't care if it's good. I don't care if it's bad. If it's something that she can watch, we're going to go to the theater. You can get whatever you want. You want to get a pizza, popcorn, it doesn't matter. There's no budget.
Absolutely.
This is what we do. Right. And, she never really has ever expressed, I'm a comic book nerd. She's never really expressed much of an interest in comic books. Though Teen Titans Go was a bit of a watershed for us. So she did enjoy that. We go to see the first one and she's glued. I'm glued. And when it finishes, the first one, I turned to her and I said to her, I just watched the greatest comic book movie that's ever been made. This movie is the closest thing to why I love comics that I've ever seen. And and one of my favorite things in the world to do on the drive home, my 9-year-old wouldn't shut up. Cecilia just kept talking about this, about that. I mean, and as a father, anytime I can get her talking, I'm just the happiest person on the planet. And she's going on and on. So Across the Spider-Verse comes out. Second, it came out that Thursday. We're there Saturday morning matinee, right? She can't wait. I'm super excited. We watched this whole thing and it's over. And we're both just silent. We just sat there and then everybody left. And she turned to me and she goes, "Oh my God, Dad." I said, "Right?" Like, it was incredibly powerful. But here's why I'm bringing this up, Chris, because guess what we then did just last week? We took Mom.
Yeah.
And it was the same experience, Chris. She sat between us and she was so excited for Andrea to experience this movie. And she already knew, and she's watching Mom, grabbing Mom's hand and just everything. And it was really something else. That's really funny.
Love it. But I guess if we're going to go.
So good.
What else? Since I don't know when you're going to air, but every 4th of July, we have a double sequel now of 1776 and Hamilton. So that is still fresh in my mind. And I mentioned Zora getting back from a camp. It was like a 2-week musical theater camp because he's a big musical theater kid. And we got back and now she's still just been singing 1776 the whole time. So it's still fresh in the house.
That's amazing.
In our minds. And as someone that identifies with John Adams, hooks are always in me. Reading wise, I'm not going to say the books because anyone that follows me knows if I'm reading something, it is potentially a redacted project. So, sure. The Diplomat, though, on Netflix was very good.
I thought that was good too. That one surprised me. Yep. It I was skeptical at first, and because it felt a little tropey initially. I felt like the acting carried early episodes. The writing caught up to the quality of the cast, and they finished real strong. Who's the woman that plays the sister?
The sister? I don't know. I know Carrie Russell plays the lead actress.
Yeah, damn it! The diplomat's sister that he ends up fooling around with, that the husband fools around with in the lake.
I don't know her name.
And she's also in what is the Peripheral. She plays the villain in the Peripheral.
Ooh, I haven't seen it yet. It's on my to watch list. Because as I said, I don't have a lot of time.
I know. I hear you. I'm going to look it up real quick because she is somebody that I knew nothing about until I saw her in these two shows. All right. I'll look it up later. I'll put it in the show notes. Phenomenal. It's a bald African-American woman. And she's an astounding actor.
No, I think she'd be a bald black British woman, if I'm not mistaken.
You're 100% correct. Thank you. Yep. You're 100% correct. Yep. She is British.
Speaking of which, another show I'd recommend that we're watching right now that is astonishing. So much so that like we watch one episode and Jill goes, I can't watch anymore. I can't watch anymore tonight. It's Hijack, Idris Elba's new show on Apple TV.
That's been calling to me because I've been watching the Silo, and it keeps seeing Idris show up there. So that's next.
Silo's on my to watch list too. But yeah, Hijack.
Okay.
Great show.
Excellent. I will definitely check it out.
I'm trying to think of other good movies I've watched recently that have really spoken to me. I'm not going to tell you any books because if I'm reading a book, I'm probably going to do a game. So that means you should follow me if you want to know what I'm potentially working on. But at the same time, I read like 4 books at once. So take that for what you will of varying topics. No, we actually recently watched the James Garner, Philip Marlowe movie from the 70s. It was an experience. His Marlowe,
you're talking about.
I think it was late 60s, early 70s. I want to say like 68 or maybe 71. I don't remember what it was called now. It might have just even Marlowe for all I know. But he was playing Philip Marlowe, and it was Philip Marlowe based in the 70s. It had Bruce Lee in it, so that was pretty awesome.
No kidding.
But he played Marlowe like Rockford, so it felt like a Rockford Files episode. James Gardner was a super likable dude, so it worked. But Bogart is still the best Marlowe.
Yeah. I'm a huge Bogart fan. I finally have gotten my wife to understand. I sat her down and I said, we're going to watch Casablanca, then we're going to watch The Big Sleep, then we're going to watch Key West, and then we're going to watch The Maltese Falcon. And it was about halfway through The Big Sleep that she goes, I get it now. I get why he's Humphrey Bogart. I'm like, yep.
Have you showed her A Lonely Place?
I have not. In fact, it has been probably 30 years since I've seen that movie.
Oh,
easily 30 years. Yeah.
What would I like about a movie about a writer with a drinking problem and being dark and broody? What would I like about that?
In no way could you relate to that, right?
Not at all. It's stretch.
Oh God. So Chris, there is a lot of things that you could be doing on a Tuesday night that's a lot more fun and engaging than sitting down and talking to me for an hour and a half. And I really appreciate you making the time.
Of course. Thank you for the invite.
And for those listening, you reached the end. I appreciate you listening as well. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to Tabletop Talk and share it with your friends. Check out our content on YouTube and Twitch. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and stay updated on everything coming from Third Floor. All the links are in the show notes. Take care, floorheads.
You know, Twitter doesn't exist anymore.
I know. Don't even get me started with that shit, man. Just remember, he's a genius, though. He invented electric cars. He invented spaceships.
That it's just try to kill you and don't work. And
dude, the boot licking. Like the meme, the meme of the guy, the Simpsons meme with the guy jumping in front of it. You know what I'm talking about? Yes. I think I've seen that reused a million times. Where it's used the best and where it is perfection is with Elon Musk, because it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And one of those things, you talk about not having an awareness. Like, I remember the other time where this really like shocked me, like like with Elon Musk, I would start a conversation with somebody about it, and we would have such different perspectives and on who he was. Like I couldn't have the conversation. I'm like, we have no common ground. There's nothing really to talk about here.
Wow.
And the only other time that I've had that happen, because I like to engage in those conversations, right? I learned from those conversations, was with effing Trump. Same thing. Like, I'd be like, man, what a joke. Like, can you believe this guy? And they're like, well, he's got, and one of them was my brother. Well, he's got this. I'm like, what the fuck what are you watching? Like, I don't even know how to have this conversation with you, because it's so goddamn obvious that it's just like impossible to be. I don't know where to start.
Do we even need to talk about how Papa Trump was in the Klan? Do we need to discuss that?
I mean, it is. And that's icing for me, right, Chris? Like, he has always been a joke. He's always been full of shit. And, you know, part of it also is growing up in New York. Up in New York, everybody's just like, everybody's known he was a snake oil salesman from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And a product of inherited money. The easiest way, you know, to make half $500 million is start with $1 billion, and that's what Trump did, right? And it's absolutely shocking. God, we're gonna get each other all riled up.
That's a whole nother conversation.
It is. All right, I'm gonna bring us back. We'll be right back. Chris, you're a really good interview.
Am I
really
running long?
are.
I'm sorry.
No, this is phenomenal. This is just phenomenal. It's exactly what I love to have happen on this podcast. So I really appreciate this.
Is it because I give no shits? Is that what it is?
I don't care what's causing you. What I'm getting is you allowing me to ask great questions and being very generous in your answers and then going way beyond it. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate that.
Thank you. So before you go back, do you know one of the real reasons for that though?
No.
So one of the reasons I started the podcast with Eddie is because it was during COVID, and Eddie and I get along really well. But I've always been more of I'm quiet. I observe, and I make particularly pointed comments about things. But I noticed that COVID has sort of shifted me even more to like not say anything, and I wanted to force myself to get back more engaged and be that person I am. And so I said, hey, Eddie, let's start a podcast about random fucking TV shows. And we talk about them. We just bullshit and we hang out. And Eddie said, you know what? What the fuck? And so that's how it started. And that and we do it weekly. So it keeps me in like the groove of being able to do this.
That's cool. That's cool. I am not familiar with your podcast. So before we come back from the break, what's the name of the podcast so I can sub it?
Genreless. I'm not going to say it's good. It's literally just us.
Oh, I'm sure it's hot garbage, but I still want to check it out. It's called Genreless.
Yeah. I even had to elevate my mic because the early episodes, when I listened to them, wow, that sounds like shit. I got to get something better than that.
All right.
This one's mediocre.
Okay, beautiful. All right. I will include it in the show notes. I'll actually have us talk about it before we leave. Very cool. Very cool.
And I talk about it because I just watched a bunch of episodes and we got to talk about it tomorrow.
All right, cool. All right, I'm going to bring us back. That was a hell of an interview, my friend.
I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No,
I'm prone to it occasionally.
It's exactly what I love on this show. And I have had I've had more difficulty getting people out of their shell. I had no trouble with you, and I really appreciate it. It's very generous of you. That was really cool. That was really, really cool. So Chris, one of the things that I offer all my guests, and it's completely optional if you bring up your call sheet, is the opportunity at the beginning of the show. I have a rotation of bumpers where basically a creator say, hey, I'm Steve Jackson. When I'm not making Munchkin, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk. If that's something that you would like to do, we can record it. If it's something you prefer not to do, totally get it.
Oh, well, I'm game.
Oh, hey, are you still here? Wow. Well, the episode is over, but if you're bored, why not go to patreon.com and support the show for as little as $1 a month? Yeah, you can just scroll down and get the link. It's Patreon that makes this and all of our other content possible. Don't you want to join the other floorheads on the Patreon Discord? Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Take care. Bye.